Right. Well, the week has been a shitstorm. Let's start there. Mr. James Plotkin, your Wikipedia page, which I am on right now, gives me a headache. There's so much creativity.
That's the
Where do
point. Just trying to bring people pain, right?
Yeah, well, where do you even get the time to do all this stuff? I mean, and that's probably a really banal, basic bitch question, but it's just, because I want to go back to the beginning of it all in a moment. But you just dropped a new Khanate album. Like, what has it been? 14 years.
Yeah, something like that.
So, well,
Uh,
where do you find the time, the hours in the day?
I mean, I haven't really done anything but music for shit. It's got to be like 15 to 20 years at this point. I mean, I've had day jobs and shitty career moves just like everybody else. Yeah. But,
Yeah,
at one point, just the thought of living a life inside, a cell in a fucking in a company in a cubicle somewhere. I think I'd probably rather die than that. So, and I mean, I never work out in that situation. I've always got, you know, I guess you could call it an attitude problem when it comes to dealing with superiors and stuff like that. It just doesn't work out and it never lasted. And I mean, I was doing music since I was a teenager, so it would
Well,
be the day job, and then all night and weekends working on music. But
and
at
so
some point, what's that?
no, it's just that like, I mean, you're doing this so much mastering, so much other stuff. Is it? And what do you like? Are you doing that during the day, and then kind of at night you're adding little bits onto the Khanate record and sort of trying to find the headspace
Pretty much.
to do different things? Like,
Yeah. If I have something going on that I need to spend more time on, I'll limit my workload when it comes to mastering and just studio work and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty much all day and all night. So I'm sure you get it. It's like after a while, it's just second nature, and you just accept the fact that that's what you've chosen to do with your life, and it just you stop thinking about it.
yeah,
You just get shit done.
yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose what it is after a certain amount of time, maybe we all kind of started off with our early formative bands and then end of the 80s, started the 90s, and then after about 10 or 20 years in it, you realize like, oh, I am a lifer, and I'm gonna I'm going to live out this as this character on the periphery of society, as you say, not fitting into the
Yeah,
9 to 5, and you just sort of accept that that's going to be where you are. You're not going to be reeled in somehow at
yeah,
your late 40s or whatever into
and
normalcy.
like you put it, it's like you're not even conscious of it while it's happening. It's like at one point you just sort of sit back and realize, oh shit, I am a lifer. It's like
Yeah,
you don't start out with like I'm going to be a lifer, I'm going to do this and nothing else because you have to compromise to be able to pay rent and
yeah,
eat
yeah,
and stuff
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
And if you do a good job and you do it long enough, eventually, you come to this realization like I guess I am in it for life.
I
That's all
think
I know at this point.
I think once you hit the 40 mark, and you
Yeah.
realize like, oh, right, okay, I've hit the 40 mark. I've been at it since I'm 15 or 16. You kind of go, I mean, there is no real turning back once you're not going to rehabilitate
Yeah, what's left?
40, and then 45 rolls along, and you're kind of okay. But I want to go back to
Yeah.
the first. I mentioned it when you were. This is kind of like this sort of just sort of random conversations, but you just mastered the new Primordial album, and I said to you during the mastering, "Oh, my first memory of you is Regurgitation." So I want to bring you back
Oh,
to what,
yeah.
1987, 88, because
Jeez, yeah.
I
Yeah.
I tape traded that demo Regurgitation, and my question was, is that Blackie Lawless on the cover of the artwork?
I know. It's not. It's just a
Ah,
random dirt bag, I guess. But if that's what you want to see it as, go right ahead. I
excellent.
think we did our first demo when I was like 16 or 15 in that band.
Yeah.
And that's actually sort of what hooked me when we managed to get on that new Renaissance Records compilation,
Ah,
Speed Metal Health 3.
of
So I'm like,
course. Yes. Yeah.
you know, I'm like, a junior or sophomore in high school, and I've got my name on a record, and I was like, this is the fucking coolest thing ever. I'm
Yeah,
never gonna stop. But
it's kind of a big deal, really. Actually, New Renaissance had quite a thing going, and they sort of dropped
yeah,
all somewhere around about 88, 89. I used to love Alan
right.
and stuff, and lots of the stuff they had. Blood Feast, I think, might have been on. I know Blood Feast might have been Wild
Oh
Rat,
yeah,
but
yeah. They were local. I used to see them live all the time. Blood Feast.
I saw them 2 years ago in Germany.
Really? They're still playing. Nice.
Yeah, they're still going.
Excellent.
But so what was it like back in your area, or what bands were around, or what led you to that first Regurgitation demo? Because that's kind of
Yeah, I mean,
cooking into a bit of nostalgic things with people as well on the podcast.
yeah. We had I mean, it was a pretty good scene around here when I was a kid, and it was only a 20-minute drive to Manhattan. I used to live just right outside of Manhattan in New Jersey.
Mm.
So I mean, I remember buying a fake ID just so I could get into CBGBs for hardcore matinees and stuff like that. But
Okay.
I was like 15 years old and would constantly get beat on by skinheads and shit. Cause it's like,
Yeah.
I would have long hair and show up to the COC show at CBGB's. And it's like, that they'd wait for you to get into the pit and then pound the shit out of you.
Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
rite of passage, I guess. But even New Jersey was great. I mean, like you said, Blood Feast were around. There was what other bands were around at that time?
Was Immolation from New Jersey, maybe?
Yeah, I think
Suffocation.
right. Incantation, I think,
Yeah,
started in
yeah.
New Jersey. I remember I used to know
Actually,
John before when he was in Revenant before he even started that band. Yeah, we
yeah,
were just
Revenant, of
kids at the
course.
time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, what else? There was like a band called Hades that was around.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, like a lot of the scene was around New York, and L'Amour's was back in the day. They were booking totally underground amateur bands, which was awesome because you'd go to see like I don't know Overkill or Possessed, and then there'd be like three local new young thrash bands opening up. So it was just even the bigger clubs were putting on shows where you'd be able to see underground thrash and speed metal. It was, in retrospect, it was pretty incredible, actually.
But you kind of veered more into now the Regurgitation demo. I mean, it's a pretty niche reference, but that's where I want
Yeah.
to come from, and then kind of go between that and the new Khanate album. Because I can see it through, I can hear a kind of through line. But what drew you to do like the Regurgitation and O.L.D Driver after that? Is more kind of like hectic grindcore with kind of some dissonance or something,
Yeah.
as opposed to speed or thrash metal. Why did you veer off into more that angle than I don't know, putting on studs and leather and being speed metal then?
Yeah, I guess it was just the timing because right after we started doing Regurgitation, that's when Earache Records just started
Yeah.
up, and I discovered the first Napalm Death record. So it was
Ah,
if you listen to the early Regurgitations, the first demo was much more inspired by European thrash, like Creator
yeah, yeah,
and Sodom, and we were big fans of like Sepultura, their first two Sepultura records back then. So everything was just sort of blackened and drenched in reverb. And then the
yeah,
second demo was a little bit more. It still had those European influences, but there was a lot of Bay Area thrash in there too as well. But it was also sort of speeding up a little bit, getting a little bit more aggressive. And then when I heard the first Napalm Death record, I was just like, what the fuck is this?
yeah,
After that, I discovered, that Repulsion had done it even before them, and it was just
yeah,
like, I was that's what I wanted to do. I was so excited about it. So, we sort of shifted over from Regurgitation to Old Lady Drivers, got
yeah,
Alan in the band, and then it went on from there. I mean, I sort of wish our early grindcore stuff wasn't as like comedic as it turned out to be. I know
yeah,
Alan was obsessed with the sort of ridiculous themes of like old ladies and shit
yeah.
like that. It's
I mean,
just
it's funny you say that because that's what sort of would put me off in 1989.
yeah.
So because I was purely, turned across towards hell,
Oh yeah.
kind of little teenage dude just, and even, even though I liked I liked the sounds on the record, and I had the Regurgitation demo trading. And was O.L.D, did you make that first grindcore vinyl? I can't remember.
Yeah, not the vinyl. I think we were a bonus track on the
I,
CD.
yeah, possibly even on the cassette as well, because I think
Yeah.
because there was Filthy Christians or something was on there, and there was some
Hmm.
great stuff, and I liked it, no doubt about it at the time, but I think the imagery kind of put me
Yeah.
off a little bit, which is a bit of a
Yeah. Yeah.
because it's sort of ahead of its kind of time as well, though.
Yeah. I mean, I was a kid when we did that, so I didn't, if it made me laugh, I was up for it.
Yeah.
But, I mean, for example, we did a 3-track demo after that became a split 7-inch with Ass Suck, and
Asok, yeah.
the themes were getting a little bit darker and more violent, but then the music, there was really no comedy in the music at
Yeah.
all. So I think that was, I wished we had sort of pursued a direction more like that than what we initially did with the
Yeah, because
first.
it's funny because that's one of the things that stuck out from the extensive biography I'm looking at here that I remember hearing at the time, and I always thought it was kind of cool for you. It crossed my mind at the time that like, oh, old lady drivers couldn't be shortened to O.L.D, which also sounded
Mhm.
kind of cool because you had DRI,
Yeah,
MOD, and SOD, and
yeah,
that's pretty. They've lucked out there by just calling
yeah,
themselves
right.
O.L.D. But then you kind of skipped on to then to do some Scorn stuff though, right? Which I know is
Yeah,
a lot of people asked me to ask you about that. I
yeah,
said I was going to talk to you, and they were like, "Oh, ask him about Scorn," which of course Paris in it. That must have been a bit of a mind fuck to do that, right?
yeah, sure. I mean, I had known Mick, since we started tape trading back in the day. So,
Mm.
and they had various guitarists along the way, and but I mean, when he asked me to work on that record, I was pretty psyched because I had always been a big fan of what he did, and including his shift to Scorn, basically. But and I mean, at that time they were changing a lot too, and what I was doing as a solo artist,
Mm.
I was changing a lot, a lot of what I was doing. We were all moving towards a headier, sort of more cerebral type of music. So and there's a pretty big shift between Colossus and Evanescence for that band. So
Yeah,
when I showed up in England and they played me what their tracking and what they had already put together, it was just like, oh, I'm going to have to completely rethink my approach to what's going on here. A welcome sort of change because it gave me room to just experiment with the guitar and the guitar synth a lot more.
because
But I mean, Mick,
that's 94, right? We're at
sometime, yeah, I think
mm.
so. I think you got it. We were doing a bunch of other things at the time too. We were working on other like collaborations and whatnot, but that was probably that. Well, it obviously had the most impact. I think that
Yeah,
record on what I was doing and their career. I mean, that record really took off. We did a lot of touring for that record,
yeah,
and it was a shame what happened afterwards, the dissolution of the sort of band that was Scorn, because
yeah.
I think it probably could have, you know, really really ascended as far as a popular band in Europe.
I think so because there was certainly Earache was an interesting kind of label in the sense that I had friends who were like when the Prodigy came out in 91, 92, and Ecstasy came into Dublin, it split the metal scene a bit, fractured it. The drugs were coming in, changing the sort of street violence vibe that Dublin had. And the Prodigy also moved some people sideways. But of course, it was all kind of working class. So you had death metal kids and people getting into drugs and electronic and that kind of stuff. And that was sort of gateway. And there were, I remember there being quite a lot of friends of mine who were sort of peripheral earwig enthusiasts
Yeah,
who weren't death metal kids, but they wanted to know about Godflesh. And then when Scorn came along, they were very interested in whatever that
yeah,
was.
mm,
It somehow seemed to be around the same time as I remember hearing Portishead for the first time, maybe 94, 95, 96,
yeah,
or other electronics. I'm not sure if you can really pull them all into the same, I don't know, sphere or something like this. But certainly there were a lot of people very interested in what was going on and the direction Godflesh were moving in as well. And then
oh,
as you say, it just sort of disappeared a bit.
yeah, yeah. I remember Mick was staying at my place in New Jersey when I think Dig from Earache had sent us a copy of the first Godflesh EP.
Oh yeah.
And that was like a huge revelation for us because we were both leaning towards a more electronic kind of industrial type of music at that point, but we weren't really releasing anything like that at the time.
Mm.
And you know, it was sort of a stigma back then when you would change genres or just
Yeah, yeah,
sort of try to expand the genre that you're working in at all. People, you know, a lot of purist ideology in the scene at that time, and you know, like O.L.D used to get a lot of shit for using drum machines and samplers live
yeah, yeah.
in a metal setting. But when we heard that record, it was just like, holy shit, this is, you know, this is the exact mindset that we're in and that we want to sort of explore. And that, you know, there wasn't much existing at the time musically that was like that, where it was just sort of smashing together or tearing apart like, you know, heavy genres of music. So that first Godflesh EP was a big,
Yeah.
like a revelation for us, really.
Yeah, I think the first, I think it was, must have been the Grind Crusher EP the first time hearing Street Cleaner for me, and then
Mm,
and being confused by what was going on because not really having a reference point of maybe some Swans or something quite yet, or not really quite understanding. You know, you're mainly listening to like fucking Deicide and Morbid Angel, but
right.
it did struck quite a big nerve with death metal people. I think it opened a lot of gates and a lot of doors. I mean, they just played
Yeah, yeah,
here and it was fucking sold out. You know, still
yeah.
able to pull 500-600 people. You know.
Yeah, you can. It's like you can still be brutally heavy, but you don't have to be fast, and you don't have to have like death metal vocals
Mm.
or like, you know, goofy, gory topics for your lyrics or anything. You know.
It was pretty grown up in a sort of apocalyptic kind of way.
Yeah,
You know.
absolutely. And even when you listen, it's how many years ago did that come out? You listen to it, and it still sounds completely relevant, which
32,
is
33 years, I guess. Yeah, 33 years, I
crazy if
guess.
you think
Yeah.
about that. Yeah, you I a lot of the music like that comes out currently. I don't hear the same things in it.
Mm.
I don't feel the same way when I listen to it. It's like, well, there's been so much precedence at this point where it's
Yeah.
like, you know, you can see the influences, but when something like that just comes out of nowhere and doesn't have any, like you're saying, it's like there aren't a lot of concrete reference points. It's like,
No.
holy shit, this is something special. This is different.
I think it's complicated because I'm not one of those guys that only listens to old music. I'd still try and hear things and get into new
Right.
things and stuff. Um, but it's very hard to compete with the virgin territory of being also just a kind of a young person exploring the
Yeah.
influence as at you at the beginning. I mean, you know, it still happens, thankfully, or else I'd feel very jaded and very old. But less so in, I suppose, some areas of metal because you've been into it for such a long time. You know, like somebody asked me to do your top 20 death metal albums from before 2000 and after, and then say would any from after 2000 get into the pre 2000. I was like, fucking hell, are you asking me to stand up something against Seven Churches or Autism
Yeah.
Madness?
Right.
I'm not sure I can do that. But
Yeah.
do you think that that time with Scorn and all that? I mean, looking at the collaborative releases here, I mean, there's so much stuff that you're doing. Did the sort of collaborative nature of Scorn sort of set that ball rolling? Because it wasn't a very metal thing to do to have names of people on your releases. Like it's a really quite unusual place to go in
Yeah.
96, 97, you know?
Yeah. For sure. I mean, yeah, I guess it was a bit of a, you know, a jumping off point for the way things were gonna be presented afterwards. I mean, you know, we
I
all
mean,
sort of splintered after that, and
you have a
and
collaborative release from 94, which is before your first solo album. I'm just looking at it here, 96. So God, I wish I'd had the fucking gumption or guts or possibility to do things like that. It seems like we're living in a different world somewhere in Ireland.
yeah,
But that was the. Sorry, I interrupted you there. But the collaborative stuff, it's quite. And then you've got one with Mick Harris in '96. I can see. But
right, right. It's
how
probably
did
the
you?
collapse album. Yeah.
Yeah, that certainly is it. But then you sort of went into years and seems like years and years of making that kind of music. Was that kind of hand in hand because you were just decided that the studio was the place you'd rather be than on the road, which is what
I
most people.
think it had a lot to do with the label landscape and the fact that labels were popping up, smaller labels that were willing to put out, you know, commercially non-viable music. That, you know, it's like we were always experimenting with sound and equipment and making recordings. Like Mick had his Lull project. Like we were really obsessed with the idea of, like drifting, droning music in a heavier sense. And before then, there weren't a lot of labels willing to do that stuff. I mean, there were sporadic labels here and there in Europe that would release, concrete music, electroacoustic music, stuff like that. But it was
Mm,
all very highbrow and clinical, and you
mm,
had to, be part of some institution to gain any sort of, uh, you know, serious views of your work. And here we are, like just cranking out strange music with limited equipment. And but then labels were popping up that would press 500 copies of a CD or 1,000 copies, and it suddenly became viable to make that kind of music for release. And you know so basically we already had tons of recordings, and we were constantly recording things on our own, doing, I guess, what you call solo recordings
yeah.
with no place to actually release them. And then all of a sudden there was these opportunities to actually put some of that stuff out there. And as time progressed, it's like they coined that term isolationism, so that they'd
Mm.
have kind of, I guess, a way to market this stuff. I think at that point that kind of music was becoming relatively popular, at least compared to the exposure it had before then. But you could actually start to, I guess, make some kind of a career for yourself doing that kind of music. I mean,
Why,
uh,
why do you think the landscape changed then in the middle of the 90s? Was it just sort of a musical shift? I couldn't.
probably a combination of that and the affordability of the gear. At
So
the
yeah.
end of the 20th century, you had the ease of acquiring, digital recording setups for your computer. I
Mm,
mean, I had wanted to build a project studio for a decade at least before computer audio became affordable and accessible. And it's like, I mean, I my home studio was a 4-track cassette until 1999, when I bought my first
yeah.
PC, got a sound card,
Yeah.
Cubase, and I was like, I can record a 24-track record at my own house now. It's just so it's just it's it's in overdrive today. I mean, everybody is recording, everybody's releasing music, but back then it was still relatively new and a niche market for that kind of stuff. So it's like, if you were serious about it, you'd spend the money, get set up, and at the time there still seemed to be a good amount of labels that were releasing that kind of stuff.
I mean,
So
I find that kind of sometimes the amount of music now is I find it sometimes overwhelming to try and
yeah,
find
absolutely.
gain some leverage in it, you know. And
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to ask you about the technology and stuff, but I might as well ask you this. I mean, I have some people, friends of mine, involved in the kind of, I suppose, soundtrack music in terms of ads, and a couple of people who are earning a lot of money doing computer game stuff. And it feels like this is the first stuff, the droning landscape stuff, that's going to be um you know moved out the door by AI, because that's there's no, you don't need the uncanny valley of a voice or something like to replicate it. It feels like they're on borrowed time, somehow, in terms
Yeah.
of some of
Yeah.
the financial things they were doing. I don't know. Why do you feel any sort of weight of that kind of thing?
Not so much weight as just disappointment. I mean, I didn't even realize what AI technology was capable of until we were actually mixing the Khanate record, and Randall Dunn was talking about it. And so I asked him about it. I was generally, you know, uneducated on the whole thing, and he
Yep.
pulls out this video on his phone, which is basically a pop a pop song complete with video, a full video, plays the whole thing for me, and it's like, this is all AI.
Yeah.
Nobody's actually composed or produced this. This was made artificially. I couldn't fucking believe it. I
Yeah.
mean, it sounded like any random pop song you pull off the internet or the radio. It's, you
Yeah, yeah.
know, it's like it's viable, but at the same time, I mean, something was just off about it. The
Mm.
people looked a little strange in the video. The vocals
For now.
sounded, yeah, for now, right?
Yeah.
The vocals sounded a little strange. There's something off about it.
Mm.
But you know, I mean, it seems like every new technology that's invented has some kind of detrimental impact. I mean, look at what home recording did to the studio suites and
Yeah.
major studios. I mean, mastering studios. You know, people can master at home on their computer. What do they need? You know, two
Right.
thousand two
I
thousand
guess
dollar limiter for? I
I
don't
mean
know.
I see the comparisons, but I think that it's probably a little bit more intellectually could you call it, compromised than that, in the sense that you're talking about
Oh
something
yeah,
that's self-learning that doesn't actually need human input. I mean,
right.
it's yeah, it's the thing about it often I see online is it's kind of like this: two middle-aged dudes talking about the effects of AI because they have a connection to art and creativity. And then real conversation is, how does an 11-year-old relate to this when they're 15, which is when, you know, we started bands, when we started to make and create music. If all you need to do is,
Yeah,
well, today I would like a new Joy Division album, you could
right, right.
do that. You could technically go, I would like a new O.L.D album in the style of this, in this studio,
Hmm.
mastered by, and you could, it could just go in 15 minutes. Here you go. Here's your new
Right, right,
Fleetwood
right.
Mac album from
Yeah,
1970.
I think
And then
the
it's a
problem
lot
with
for our
that,
brains to take in, you know?
yeah, I think the problem with that is, well, people like me that are constantly looking for something new that hasn't been thought of before or done before. And with AI, you're basically, you know, it develops these pieces of music or art solely by, you know, referencing things that everything that's been done in the past. So it's like,
Mm,
how is
yeah,
AI going to come up with a new genre of music that actually makes sense, or that, you
it's,
know,
it's a very good
I
point,
think
because
I
that's
think
what,
if no, I think if you're interested in human creativity, then you're not going to get what you need out of AI, because it's not human creativity.
no.
It's a mashup of everything that's come before it, basically.
Yeah, it's just cogging. It's just, you know, okay, you know, pulling or pooling all of the influences, all of the things, and just
Yeah,
something. If you said, hey, we have a new, let's say you're a death metal band playing now, and you go, I would like a new album in the style of Dan Seagrave. It's not like as if you were an artist who's influenced by Dan Seagrave and maybe adding your own.
right.
It's just approximating all of the things that he
Yeah.
did before. On some level, I'm kind of glad to have had 30 plus years of making music behind me,
Mm.
even though I don't enjoy the benefits of growing old so much sometimes. I'm going to play a football match now shortly, and I'll feel that tomorrow. But at the same time, I'm glad to have the kind of looking back over it, because it was sort of seems now like starting a band right now has got so many other pitfalls, or maybe that's
Yeah.
imagining that's how it is for young people. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I talk to a lot of younger artists that are just starting bands and doing recordings, you know, mastering. I master a lot of people's first recordings and stuff like that. And yeah, I mean, I think about what it takes to be in a band when when you have your foot in the door, and it's exhausting to me to even think about it. I can't even think of what these younger people are going to have to go through. I mean, occasionally I'll work on a record, and you know, maybe I'll be friendly with the artists, and we'll reach out for them to various labels. I rarely ever do it, but every now and then, like you know, a sophomore or freshman recording just like blows me away, and it's
Hmm.
like, well, I'd like to help these people try to, you know, get started at least. And it's like, where do you even start these days? There are so many labels, and labels seem to be very clicky these days. Like they want to stay within their boundaries and not take chances on music, on
Yeah, but
something that they,
they're also requiring bands to be their own PR. In that,
yeah,
I mean, for an awful lot of labels, they're not going to sign a band unless they already have a digital imprint from which they can work with.
Right.
And
Right.
they might release your album, but then it's up to you to keep being your own PR. And
Sure.
it is completely exhausting. It's
Yeah.
exhausting when you're 23 and you understand all the technology, I guess.
Yeah.
But the idea of kind of stepping up the rungs of the ladder to reach some
Hmm.
sort of place where you can begin to pay for the responsibilities of life that are going to be incoming as you get that bit older seem
Yeah.
further and further away. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and even the bands that are well established, it's not like you can just sit back and rely on that to make a living. Like
No.
you really have to be a large drawing artist these days to be able to, make a comfortable living off of it.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, I don't, with more and more music being released every year, and then the possibility of AI stepping in and clouding the atmosphere. It's like I wouldn't want to be a young artist these days.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as you say I have a large discography or Wikipedia page, I work every day, man. I'm here Monday through Friday,
Okay. Well, yeah. I
working
mean,
my ass off.
I wasn't insinuating that the solo
I
releases from
know, I know.
'95 were firing in there. You were
Yeah.
like just cashing all these checks. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but even when I was doing a lot of my own music, like back in the days of O.L.D and Scorn
mm,
and the early days of Khanate, it wasn't really enough to make a living off of.
yeah,
You
yeah.
have to have the side hustle. You have to
Many
either
side
have
hustles.
like a career and selling gear or selling records on the side. It's like I wouldn't trade it for anything because I've been free to do whatever the hell I want for most of my life. But yeah, the idea of starting a band or being a musician as a career that's a big one these days.
And so, what was the impulse then, considering all of this for the Khanate record? Just you just were just working on it, kind of in the evening, sort of, in the laboratory downstairs, fucking
Yeah,
cooking it
I
up.
mean, I guess at this point in my career, I can sort of make the time when I need to. I can be strategic about scheduling mastering work so that I have time to do stuff like that. Um, but it's like if I had to take off a week to like, we did two mix sessions on the record, and each one I had to take a week off, and then you have to, pay for your expenses in a city like New York.
Yeah,
I'm not home doing my real job making a living, so
yeah.
it's like, just make it's more of at this point, you just have to make sacrifices to make it happen.
Well, yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Once now that it's done and we're planning live shows and stuff like that, there's
Wow.
there's an
Okay.
opportunity to make money, but I mean that's money is the last reason that we're doing it. I mean, we're in the hole for making this record. We
Yeah.
spent a good amount of money of our own making this record. We recouped some of it so far, but it's we did it. Can honestly say we did it for the music itself.
And live shows are going to be coming. That's an interesting. I mean, were you thinking about that when you were making the record that you're gonna?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we weren't gonna decide anything until the record was done, and everybody's got busy schedules, so it's really the hardest part of it is making the scheduling and logistics work. So,
Mm,
but we're planning on 2024 doing getting started with maybe
well,
some festivals and shows.
that's one thing that's at least as different from years ago is that there's
Yeah.
a ready-made kind of like festival run
Oh yeah, yeah.
for you that you can pop in and out. You don't need to do Tuesday in Rochester to 42 people, or you
And
don't need to do that
I'm too
anymore.
old for that shit.
Yeah, and the festival experience is it's I love it. Going back and forth,
Yeah.
different things every weekend. But yeah, that's kind of like a new, and maybe that'll be like a sort of an interesting middle-aged lease of life for the whole thing again.
Right.
To
Right.
be able to just kind of step in without quite so much of the logistics. Although, you know, so
Yeah. I mean, the offers that we've been fielding for this have, it's there's no comparison to when we were in like an active band in the
yeah, yeah,
early 21st century. It was just, we could make it work back then because we all had day jobs.
yeah.
But now it's like, it's commercially viable to do something like that, which is, yeah, definitely didn't exist when we were around before.
Yeah, hang on just one second.